I appreciate you guys coming in. Let's go to the next slide. The purpose of this presentation uh, is really to share with clients what we're seeing in the market, and that's one of the functions we have in our data insights research lab is to show our practice and our clients what we see is coming next. And I've got the best job in the firm. I get to play with the new technologies, the new toys, work with data scientists at leading institutions around the world and universities. So it's a great gig. And like I was saying before, I sponsor our relationship with UC Berkeley Haas around data science and data strategy. So I guess that's enough about me. I would like to introduce, or let Nathan and Hallie introduce themselves, get started in this presentation, and tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nathan Shutterly. I'm the research lead for John. So over the last few years, I've been in this role taking on, figuring out what technology we should be focusing on, right? We have a lot of autonomy. We can look at anything we want. And so a little bit later, I'll talk about how we first focused on some of the data platforms, then started focusing on analytics, moved into visualization, and now, as you'll hear later, start to talk about things like strategy.
Great. Thanks, Nate. So I've met most of you. In addition to my role as program manager for the relationship we're developing with Haas, I'm also the strategy lead for the Data Insights Research Group. And so I just wanted to set a bit of context for sort of how we got to where we are today. So as Greg mentioned, we'll be giving this talk in London in 2 weeks. And the point is to sort of help deliver the message of John and Nate's vision that has since also become my own of spreading data as gospel, for a lack of a better way of putting it. So 5 years ago, I joined Accenture as a strategy consultant after a master's in economics, and just want to set a bit of context. So I was staffed on my first project, and I found out it was a data strategy project. And I didn't really know much about strategy. Having come out of a master's in economics, I liked data, but it was kind of an interesting, I was a little nervous, we'll just say that. And but I was promised that the partner who was running the gig was like the data strategy guru, and I was going to be fine. So we're out for dinner with the team early on in the project, and I end up sitting next to the partner. I end up having a conversation about my background, and oh yeah, I just finished a master's in economics. And he sort of looks over with a twinkle in his eye, and he goes, "Oh, so you must like data." I was like, okay, yeah, I think I do like data. And little did I know that by admitting that, I would end up here 5 years later, because that partner was and remains John Miller. So I joined the team here in the labs about 8 months ago to help John and Nate sort of bring strategy consulting and strategic thinking to some of the tech innovation that we're doing. And so we'll get into sort of what we're seeing in the market, but I'm going to let Nate first take you through the journey of the Data Insights Lab and how we got to where we are today. So I just went out of order because Nate's not first. It's actually John. So now John is going to tell you, and then Nate's going to tell you. Do you want to?
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you for letting us dry run this presentation in front of you. Okay, so let me ask a question before we get started. Who in the room has done a data strategy for their current client, or for their current company, or for a client? Show of hands. A few of you guys. Yeah, so I do a lot. I mean, before I joined Labs, that's sort of the focus of the work that I've been doing. And I've probably done over 20, many in financial services, retail banking, insurance, a little oil and gas, some energy trading, communications, some high tech. And the point of all that is, I thought I knew what data strategy was, okay? And I thought, okay, I must be an expert in it. I can grow a team, do a lot of work. And what I was starting to realize is that my conception of what you do in a data strategy engagement is changing. And I used to think it was about a series of workshops where we define a vision of how we can change the business and how a business can exploit opportunities. Like the example you saw, that's a small scale example, but how do we transform a business to exploit data and insights and analytics? That's typically what we do in a data strategy gig. We create a lot of PowerPoints we have that explain in very minute detail the analysis we've done, the research we've done, the comparative assessment of why this client should actually change the way they behave, make investments in technology and data science. And we put together a business case, and we also put together a roadmap. How do you go from where you are today to where you want to be, right? I want to be a data-driven or an insight-driven enterprise, right? That's sort of the tagline for every one of these engagements. And what I've come to realize is that they all suffer a flaw, right? And the one example I wanted to give you, it's indicative of a lot of data strategy work we did early on, is, and this is one case study, there's many like it, that a great data strategy has to be beyond PowerPoint. It's beyond just a business model or a business case. You actually have to look at the problem differently. And so the financial services company I'm talking about here, actually Calvin, who's in the room, actually did the work with me or for me. And it's a very common use case. So you've heard a lot from retail bankers here before. They have to change their business to be more focused on the customer experience, whether that's in mobile or online or in the branch or at home over the phone. However you're interacting with your client, you have to change and improve your interaction. It has to be more personalized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is driven by better use and application of data, insights, and driving outcomes, as the last speaker said. So we all know that. It's a very common reason for retail banks to change. And in this case, it was an insurance company. And there was a very real business case. If we could they were currently able to run 2 campaigns a week. And if we could drive it up to 15 campaigns a week, we could retain more of the people that are leaving and drive up acquisition rates. It's a very clear reason we wanted to invest in this strategy. And to do that, we needed to improve their data capabilities, their ability to get insights from the data and drive analytics. The problem with this piece of work, because I had a great team. We did great work. We had senior business leadership engaged, technology leadership engaged. And the problem is they didn't do anything after we had completed the strategy. It took months. And we kept getting calls, hey, how is this going to work? What is the journey going to be like for us? And what we realized is that there were so many unknowns for the senior leadership team that we couldn't address by telling them. We couldn't bring in an expert and say, yeah, this is how I did it. We couldn't show them case studies. We actually had to show them. We didn't do that on this strategy engagement and several others, and it was very difficult to go from strategy to actually execution. Because a data strategy without execution it's a good gig, but it's not making an impact. And the big thing that we could have done, we could have shown them how to integrate the data from across their business units. We could have shown them how to integrate external data very quickly. We could have addressed those concerns that they had as senior leadership, because a lot of their programs have failed. A lot of data programs do fail because they can't move quickly. But we could have shown them how. We could have shown them how to use a cloud-based platform with some great tricked out tools, right? We've got a lab that can show you how to do that. We could integrate the data. We could have shown them that. We could have shown them how to build the model and actually run a simulation on an actual campaign and said, hey, look, here's the lift. We could have shown them all of that, but we didn't. And so the conclusion of all of this is that data strategy, to be effective, has to change. It has to be showing senior leadership how to make the change real. And the exciting part of this realization is that there's a team in California that I now run that can actually do that, right? And I'll tell you a lot more about the team in subsequent slides, but if you can actually do the great work to do the business case and to show them the journey and show them how they're going to get over the obstacles that prevent them from moving forward and funding big programs, they'll actually execute. And I mean, it's become a bit of a lesson learned. If senior business executives don't understand what they're buying in a multi-$100 million program, they can't go forward. And they want to. And you know, as sort of future leaders, you're going to have to change. You're going to have to be change agents, right? You're going to have to convince people that your vision is correct. And you got to show them. And we're at the point of technology inflection where there's enough complication that you have to show them. And that's the thesis of this presentation. If I break it down into the three things you've got to get right, the first is go from the concepts of the vision. You know, I want to be insight driven. What does that mean? I want to be able to be personalized experience at the front line. Well, what does that mean? Show them. So we do demos here in the tech labs of what the mobile experience will look like. We can actually just show you with an app, a data-driven example of how that could work. So take vision concepts and actually show them how that can be applied to drive value. We had a great business case, and if you can show them what that's going, how you get to that, it makes sense. The second thing is around agility, and really that's the notion that in order to show a client how they're going to get value from their data strategy, it might be a combination of a demo. It might be a mobile app we have to build or a prototype we have to build. It might be some data science we have to execute. It might be some data visualizations to explain the concept. It might be all three. So the way you show them is you actually have to have a little data insights team of your own to actually show them. And I'm talking about big transformational change. And the third is really focusing on solving a specific business problem. The last speaker talked about it. And I think the key here is that when you're doing a data strategy, the big change has to be, whilst you're doing it, you have to pick a business problem that you can focus on and actually demonstrate the value, like you did in the last exercise. So I've said enough about how strategy is going to change. Why don't I pass back over to Nate and tell you a little bit about how our lab, or actually, question.
So are you basically saying that you build proof of concepts for the executives to make it all real, that yes, we can solve the problem and this is how you can visualize? Is it more a proof of concept, like a more MVP-driven, lean startup kind of mentality that you're applying here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the question was, do you actually build the prototype to do a proof of concept to show them? Yes. That's got to be the answer, because that's what they need to see. They need to see that it can be done. Then they ask the question, well, then I want that team to go do it. And they go forward and do it. And that's the key, right? Because we have the data, we have the technology. Let's go show them how to do it.
Thanks, John. So we're going to Tarantino this a little bit and jump backwards, kind of 6 years to when I joined Accenture Technology Labs, and also give you guys a little bit of context. So you're here. I now assume you're familiar with Data Insights and John Miller in one of our labs. We actually have 5 of these labs across the globe. I won't drain the slide, but behind me, and we have these things called strategic innovation initiatives. So what the larger part of Accenture Technology Labs that we represent is our methodology for looking at change in the technology space and then organizing people to go after that. So I won't talk much about that, but in a parallel to us, we're looking at things like digital experience, the Internet of Things, security, a lot of these different things, and we partner with those guys a lot as well. We can go to the next slide here. When I first started interacting with tech labs, it was about 6 years ago now. I was in the utility industry. I was a consultant, and I was trying to solve energy efficiency problems. This is a little bit after the 2008. And we were looking at things like synchrophasers that were dumping amazing amounts of data into organizations that there was no way of dealing with unless we bought a lot of very expensive databases. So what the group here was looking at the time, the name was called Data and Platforms, is they were looking at data and platforms. Things like, this is a more recent slide, but this is big data core here. We were looking at technologies like Hadoop, Cassandra, a lot of these technologies that come out of the area now. Now, if I would have asked this question 6 years ago of a group of people like this, I think no one would raise their hand. How many of you are aware of Hadoop? Yeah. So technology moves very, very quickly. Just to get a sense of the technical nature of the audience, how many of you have written a MapReduce job or somehow or installed Hadoop? Right on. Okay, cool, cool, cool. So these were the types of things that we were doing, but we were actually trying to figure out how to get the largest organizations on the planet to leverage this technology that was vastly cheaper and allowed us to do some really, really interesting things. I did some cool research projects there. After one of those research projects, I actually got asked to join labs, move out to California. And if we go to the next slide, you know, very quickly after you can write a MapReduce job and get some data out, you start going, okay, but what does that mean? What value do I get from this enormous petabytes and petabytes of data? And that's where we started looking into leveraging techniques that, and I think this mirrors the industry, but looking at machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, not new analytical techniques, but ones that have become vastly more impactful with large data backing them. So what you see behind me, I think you'll get to play with this demo a little bit later today, is an LCA Graph Explorer. So this is just an example of one of the research things that we conducted in this analytical space. So LCA stands for Log Content Analytics. So we're just dumping in all of the logs. In this case, it's security data. And then normally when you look at this data, you are trolling through logs and trying to understand what's going on, and you're using your human brain to understand, oh, this user did this, and then they set off this other system that did something. But it takes kind of an analyst to go through and do that. We created some machine learning algorithms that allowed us to actually click through and understand how those temporal events were connected. So I could actually look at a series of events and look and understand what happened when and what kicked off what and how that's related. So we think that this is a great way of looking at that space and changing the way that security analysts look at intrusion. So this is kind of an intrusion detection scenario. So once we went from that, we kind of started with this data management and database platform focus. Then we started looking at analytics, which is kind of the obvious next step. And if you haven't gotten it from the pictures here, the last piece that we started focusing on, this was kind of last year, was data visualization. And we got to the point where we said, okay, we have the data. We have ubiquitous access to all of the data in my theoretical world. And we have amazing data scientists creating algorithms to get the insight out of that. The CEO probably still doesn't care. Because if it's complex and you're giving him ratios or you're giving him coefficients and he has 5 minutes to look at this problem, you may not get your point across. You may not get to the strategic change that's required to change the way that business operates. But if you can visualize that in a way that as humans we understand things very quickly, and if you can create an explorative visualization that will drill down and answer any of the questions he's going to have, you can start to not only accelerate the access to that data, accelerate the insight coming out of that data, but you can accelerate the comprehension of the message that we're trying to drive. And so that last year, we worked on integrating data scientists, data visualization engineers, technology architects, and that sounds simple when I say it, but getting folks who have very, very different worldviews, getting artists and mathematicians and architects to work together, it is more challenging than it seems. And it seems simple, but most organizations have a really hard time doing that. So the next part, and you'll get to see this room a little bit later, right over here, but is, okay, so we have this powerful weapon of change that we can point at any problem we want. And in labs, we kind of can, we do lots of fun things and also very important things. But when I started working with John on some big projects, what I kind of realized was, okay, we're focusing on some, tactical, how do we change how people interact and make a little bit more money for this project for a bank, or how do we, drive energy efficiency here? But if this is as powerful a tool as I think it is, why are we not going at the most impactful questions out there? Why are we not asking what's the biggest thing we can do and aiming this at that? And with that, we started answering that question by going, we can and we should, and how do we maximize that so that maximize the impact and the messaging to C-suites and boards and the folks that can actually affect change for those issues? So with that, I'll let Hallie take the stage here and talk a little bit about how this year we're focusing on strategy.
Sure. So yeah, that last point Nate made, I think the last speaker had everyone go through an exercise where you were identifying what is the most important problem and how do you start to think about solving that. So the journey that Nate just sort of outlined, I came in right at the end. So as the team was focused on, okay, we've got all of this really powerful, not only data, but methodologies and ways to describe it and to make it impactful. That question of how do we go after the most strategic and important questions to an organization was something that I had been focusing on and doing a lot of work in as a strategy consultant. So I came down and over the last 8 months, the work that I've done with this team to sort of understand how clients are currently thinking about data strategy and how there are broken linkages between understanding in theory and then seeing the actual impact and change we can have has been an incredible journey for me personally from a learning point of view, and then also to see our clients undergoing that journey with us as well. So change is coming. The idea that the way you think about strategy needs to change, John outlined for us at the beginning. We have to show it. Until we can show executives the actual power of change, it's going to be really hard for us to make that relevant. So for us, over the last couple of years, for John and Nate, and for me over the last 8 months, we've sort of identified 3 main points. Consultants speak in threes. So 3 main points of what is driving this change and why we think that any organization who doesn't start to adopt this method of thinking is going to be left behind. So those 3, you can see on the slide behind me, are sort of reiterate what John was saying. So the idea of strategic impact, agility and speed, and then show me and prove it. So instead of draining what's there, I just want to bring this back to an example. I'm currently running a project for our healthcare organization that is trying to understand how you visualize the future of healthcare. So the industry is undergoing massive transformations. We're all experiencing that every day. And this concept of how do you help a system understand the impact that those changes are going to have, not only legislation, but how do you start to provide care in a different paradigm? So each one of these can actually relate directly back to this project. So the idea of strategic impact, the healthcare practice has a bunch of different organizations that sort of focus on different problems. So there is an analytics group that helps hospitals think about how to become more analytical. How do you leverage data? How do you think about your back office function? There are strategy sort of folk who think about some of those executive board questions that come up. But as they started to understand that the transformation was industry-wide, that this wasn't a facility-level problem or a state-level problem, or even a single provider problem with, nationwide. Once it became clear that it was the entire industry is about to undergo a transformation, they realized we need to take ourselves out of the weeds and get up to a point where we've got a team focused on this problem as a whole, right? So as soon as the impact can sort of come out from that lower level and sort of more focused point up to something that is broadly impactful, the idea is that you kind of need a team that can take all of the different points of view, pull them together, and start to focus on answering those most impactful questions. The second one around agility and speed, John mentioned earlier the idea of speed to value and going from vision to value, and how for our clients and our organization actually as well, you are starting to see that being able to articulate a vision and take it from concept to implementation where you're actually realizing that value. The ability to do that at speed is going to be a defining strategic advantage. So at the beginning of this healthcare project, we went out to New York to participate in a workshop. Another research organization was thinking about the impact, the transformation of the industry, and looking at it from an M&A perspective. What is the impact going to be when hospitals start to think about partnering to provide certain levels of care? And the leader of that workshop gave us an anecdote that was just such an aha moment for me, where he had asked a county, it was a county around the way they think about building strategy for public health. And they said, well, we decide to change a few indicators, and 3 years later, we see what changed. So we decide to make a few changes, and then 3 years later, we see how that's impacted the population. And the leader of the workshop said, wow, well, with all the data that we've got, I'm pretty sure that I could put that into a simulator and tell you the answer in 4 hours. So the idea that industries, I mean, especially those that are starting to become more data-driven, industry, the ability to say, I have an idea, I wonder what that will mean, and take that through to, a proof of concept or a proof of value where you're able to actually in real time understand what that means and how you're going to affect change is something that's quite powerful. And the third one, show me, prove it. The idea that John and Nate have both sort of articulated is until you're able to prove what you're talking about and actually show it to the people in the room or the people who are going to be making the decisions about transformation, it's too easy for it to feel like an insurmountable problem. So this was something that we saw. Like I mentioned, all the healthcare sort of organization is comprised of a bunch of different units, and they recognized the need for change and that they wouldn't be able to do it alone, but they sort of were spinning in cycles around how do we actually do this? It feels like it's too big of a problem for us to understand how we all fit together. And so our team sort of put up their hands and said, well, our data insights group can actually show you how all those things fit together. Give us the data from each of the different organizations. We'll look at the data, and we will actually show you what we think the future of healthcare can look like based on what the data is going to tell us, right? So rather than you sitting and thinking about how conceptually these pieces fit together, let the data tell you that story, and let our team show you how that happens. So, yeah, I think that it's been an amazing journey to watch clients go through that process and really starting to feel much more real the need to drive all of this with a team that can understand how to take it from insight to outcome. So I think I'm going to pass it back to John, who's going to tell us a bit more about what that actually looks like. Thanks, John.
Okay. So, there was a few of you that have done data strategies before. I mean, I'd love to just, if you've either participated in one or seen one happen or heard another consultancy talk about it, have you seen examples where they've used simulation or data visualization or machine learning to make it real? So do you have an example?
It's not big data space.
Okay.
Kind of a startup environment. So it's a startup environment where we get data from disparate data sources, and my engineering team uses Jarrow-Rinkler algorithm for entity matching, and 2 engineers were working on it for about 2-3 months. And I learned about this tool called Alteryx, which I took back, and I gathered these data in Excel. I just fed it in Alteryx, and the output was kind of pretty much the same what they were getting through the code. So it was kind of a practical approach to using one of the learnings in class.
Yeah.
And that was my first exposure of practically doing something in class. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I mean, and so, the reason we put this together, this presentation, is to show organizations that they need to create a team, like a startup, right? This is not a novel concept in this part of the world. But that's the team I've got here. This is a picture of the team. You actually need to have a startup mentality. You get a small group of people. My team's around 25 strong. They're not all there on the slide, but it's a group of 5, right? We typically say, I'm going to deploy a 5-person team. You're going to get a designer to design the data visualization. You're going to get a data engineer to do all the data fusion stuff. You're going to get a tech arc to make sure the kit works. You're going to get a data scientist or an analytics person, and you're going to get a business analyst. That's the 5-person team that's the SWAT team. We're going to go figure out what kind of demo we can put together to demonstrate the value. And you run it like a startup, right? And that's the luxury I have. We're a 330,000 person company, Accenture, but I get to deploy small little startup teams into our most important data strategy gigs. And that's the purpose of this talk, is just to say it's having a big impact. And that's the big revolution that's going on in data strategy. And as future leaders, this is a good opportunity when you are trying to sell your next great idea. We're seeing this notion of a data insights lab as being integral to driving insight-driven enterprises. We have this conversation with clients all around the world, right? This is the talk that I give around how we can help. And usually we work for the chief strategy officer. Usually it's a function that the CEO cares about. Sometimes it's a board level conversation, but we're really trying to do big change. And it's about changing the whole business, not just taking out one small piece. Because I think as you learn, or you've already learned, or maybe that's why you're in the class, you know that data is changing everything. So how do we have a big impact? Build a lab. Because your example, you found Alteryx. I've got people that I allow them to, we mainly use open source projects, but we use that tool and anything they want to really, let's get creative around how we bring that innovation around exploiting data to our clients. And that's where we see it all coming together. The rest of these points will show you the immersive environment that over here, we're building a network of these around the world where we can bring clients in to show them. Obviously, you need a data platform. You can't just do it on your laptop. The last thing that's sort of unique that we learned is that we bought a design consultancy a few years ago called Fjord. We realized that organizations need to bring designers with data visualization skills to tell and sell the story. And that's sort of the last bit of it. Thank you. Questions? Cool.
So this ties back to the previous speaker. So she mentioned that whenever you look at data and you want to come up with a strategy, you start with certain hypothesis.
Yeah.
Some 80-20 rule. Is that something you guys follow too? Or when you look at data, what do you decide? Like, how do you go about thinking that, hey, okay, this can happen, this cannot happen? Do you bucketize them and stuff like that?
Yeah, no, I heard that question. And I think you can come at the problem from a few different angles. So we teach our strat consultants to use issue-based problem solving. It's a technique that's somewhat more elaborate than that, but it's a technique to identify the issues and then define hypotheses around what would actually drive a different outcome. So that's one way to take it, purely from a business lens. The other way, because I've got data scientists who believe they don't even need that. And they say, this interrogating the data example she gave, I completely believe that. I'm a data guy from way back. I believe that based on common sense and my business experience, I can exploit the data to learn something that can actually help define, an outcome. But I think it's a marriage of both. In the applied learning course we're going to do in the fall, we're actually going to bring those two together because it's not either or, it's and, right? Are we almost out of time, Greg?
One more question?
Okay.
And there are some tools called predictive analysis. Have you heard of those type of tools? So what they do is they just punch data and help you to get insight. So sort of DIY consultant, data strategy consulting. Do you think those two will put the thread on your business? Or what do you think?
No, that's a great question. Let me just restate it to make sure I got it right. So you're saying that there are new tools that are doing predictive or prescriptive analytics and predictive analytics that could disrupt the industry, right? So people that sell consulting services around analytics will be replaced by software. I think that's absolutely the things that we're studying in our labs, and we've got a whole group focused, actually Josh is running it, around cognitive computing. And we're looking for techniques to do that. And there's a lot of interesting startups that are addressing some of the problems in that space. And I think they're very exciting. And I don't think they're replacing humans yet. I think they're augmenting our data teams right now. And what they're trying to do is recommend algorithms, recommend visualizations, recommend data munging, recommend everything so that you can augment the team on the ground. So you need less specialized skills to drive a data project. But it's a cool space. We're watching it. It's really important. And that's the other function of my lab, is to find the things that are disruptive, right? If we could replace, or augment our work with software, so be it. Let's go do it. Let's figure that out first, because that's a new business opportunity.
So Nate and John and Hallie will all be here during reception, so you should feel free to approach them and ask any additional questions. Thanks, guys.
Oh, we get Paul? Yeah.